Chapter 1 Shadows Before the First Master. The galaxy was never silent in those days. It was a time before order, before law, before any single will could command the dark side. The Sith were many to many, each one a master in their own mind, each one clawing at the galaxy with red-stained hands, each one deaf to any voice but their own. They did not fear the Jedi, for the Jedi were far away and slow to move. They feared only one thing, each other. The holocron's whisper of crimson banners unfurled across 1,000 worlds, of towers forged from black stone and bone, of fleets that blotted out the suns above war-torn planets. Yet for every empire the Sith built, another Sith would come to tear it down. For every world claimed, a rival would rise to burn it. Brother struck down brother. Masters poisoned apprentices before they could strike. Allies shared wine one night, and drove blades into each other's backs the next. The galaxy groaned under the weight of their ambition. Cities drowned in firestorms. Oceans boiled. Mountains were split as if the gods themselves had struck them. But there were no gods in those days, only Sith, and the Force itself, watching in silence. It is said the Force does not think as mortals do. It does not take sides. It simply seeks balance. And the Sith, in their arrogance, had tipped the galaxy too far into shadow. The dark side fed on their hatred and rage, yet it also began to devour itself through them. Every victory tasted of ash, for it lasted only until the next blade fell. The Great Sith Wars, they call them that now, though there was nothing great in them. There were no heroes, no peace treaties, no songs to mark the fallen, only endless slaughter between those who claimed the same creed, the same hunger. The Jedi, in their gleaming temples, could only watch as their enemies destroyed themselves. In the shattered archives of Moraband, there is a single fractured tablet from that age. Its script is jagged, half-burned, but its meaning is clear. The Sith shall be as stars, countless in number, each burning alone, each doomed to die cold. And yet, even in the ashes, something was stirring, far from the great battlefields. In the dust-choked corridors of a forgotten tomb, a lone acolyte studied the ancient scripts. He had no name worth remembering, not yet, but his eyes were sharp. He saw what others refused to see, that the Sith's greatest enemy was not the Jedi, it was themselves. This acolyte walked the ruins of a dozen Sith citadels, stepping over the bones of lords who had lived only long enough to be betrayed. He learned from their failures. He saw patterns where others saw chaos. To him, the endless war was not proof of Sith strength. It was proof of their weakness. Legends say the Force itself took notice. Whether that is truth or vanity, no one can say. But whispers began to spread. Among the dying, among the lost, there was talk of a vision, a figure cloaked in shadow, unseen yet inevitable, a spark in the darkness, waiting for the galaxy to grow quiet enough to speak. For centuries, no such figure could rise. The Sith of that age were too loud, too proud, too quick to destroy any who showed even a glimmer of potential. But the spark waited. It watched. It let the others burn themselves out. This was the time before the law was written, when there were no limits on ambition, no restraint on greed. The dark side was not one voice, but a chorus of screams, each trying to outshout the others, until all that remained was noise and blood. On worlds long since turned to dust, the banners of forgotten Sith still rot in silence. On the bones of their thrones, sand drifts like snow. No one remembers their names, No one remembers their victories. The galaxy has forgotten, but the holocrons have not. The holocrons speak in a low, patient tone. They could not rule because they could not wait. They could not last because they could not hide. Power without patience is a candle in the storm. It would take centuries before the storm passed, before the screaming quieted, before one would rise to listen and then to speak. The shadow that would become Darth Bane was not yet flesh, not yet thought, but the galaxy, in its ruin, was making a place for him. The bones of the old Sith Empire would become the foundation for something greater, something enduring. But for now, this was still the age of many, an age doomed to end in silence. And, in that silence, the first true master would be born. Chapter 2: Darth Bane and the Black Doctrine. The war was over, but there was no victor. The last of the old Sith Lords lay scattered like shattered statues across the galaxy, lifeless, monuments to their own arrogance. Worlds once burning with their banners now stood silent under Jedi watch. And from the ruins of that chaos, one figure stepped forward, not to claim a throne, but to erase every throne that had ever been built. His name was Bane, not yet a dearth, not yet the spectre who would haunt the Jedi for centuries, but already a man set apart from the rest. Where others lusted for the scraps of a dying empire, Bane sought something more enduring, a design, not conquest for its own sake, but conquest as a craft. He had walked the corpse of the old Sith Order and seen its rot firsthand. Too many lords, too many rivals, too many voices screaming to be heard. If the Sith were to survive, they could not survive as a mob. They had to become a single, perfect blade, and every blade must have a hand to wield it. The Jedi believed, the Sith extinct. Bane believed that was the greatest gift the galaxy could have given him, for in secrecy he could remake everything. No more armies, no more legions, no more endless slaughter between self-proclaimed lords, from the depths of Moraban, in chambers untouched by centuries of war. Bane uncovered forgotten archives, scrolls that spoke of ancient strategies, rituals, and philosophies long ignored by his predecessors. It was here that the dark side whispered its approval, not as a roar, but as a low, steady pulse that matched the beat of his own heart. The rule of two was born in those shadows. It was simple in words, brutal in practice. One master, one apprentice, no others. The master would hold all knowledge and power, training the apprentice not in loyalty, but in ambition. The apprentice would learn, would grow, and in time would kill the master. And so the cycle would continue, a chain unbroken, each link forged in the fire of betrayal and the hunger for dominance. This was not mercy. It was not trust. It was design. Every master would teach everything they knew, knowing that their death would be the final lesson. Every apprentice would take everything they had learned, sharpen it into a weapon, and strike when they were ready. Bane understood what the Sith of old never could. Survival was not in numbers, but in patience. A hidden Sith could wait decades, even centuries, for the right moment to act. The Jedi, seeing no armies on the horizon, would grow complacent. There, temples would become fat with scholars, their knights untested in true war. And when the day came, the Sith would strike not as an army, but as a blade to the heart. He did not write his law on tablets for the galaxy to see. He carved it into the bones of his apprentice. She was Zana, chosen not for loyalty, but for potential. He forged her in cruelty, teaching her not to trust even him. Every lesson was a trap, every kindness a test, for only through cunning and suspicion could a Sith truly survive. Bane's reign was not marked by grand battles, for battles would expose him. It was marked by precision whispers in the ears of politicians, assassinations no one could trace, artifacts stolen from under the Jedi's noses. While the Republic believed itself safe, Bane was building the foundation for its destruction. In secret rituals, deep within the tombs of Moraband, Bane sealed his doctrine with blood and shadow. The holocrons of the old Sith were locked away, hidden so that no one could use their teachings to raise an army again. Only he and his apprentice would know the full truth. Only they would shape the future. The Jedi archives speak little of Bane. In their records, he is a name from a war long past, a relic of a defeated age. But the holocrons remember differently. They speak of the cold in his eyes, the patience in his hands, the way the dark side seemed to still itself when he entered the room, as though it recognized one of its own architects. Bane did not seek to be remembered by the galaxy. He sought to be remembered by the Sith, for as long as the rule of two endured, his presence would endure with it. Every master and apprentice who came after would be bound by his law, whether they loved it or hated it. His shadow would stretch across centuries, shaping the destinies of Sith not yet born. And so the Black Doctrine was written, not in ink, not in stone, but in blood and inevitability. The galaxy would never again see legions of Sith marching under the same banner. It would see something far worse, a hidden lineage of predators, each more cunning than the last, each biding their time until the moment came to strike. Bane's eyes were always on the future. The old Sith were gone, and he had no wish to resurrect them. He was not their savior. He was their executioner. From that moment on, there would be no more many. There would be only two. And in that simplicity lay the most dangerous truth of all, that patience and secrecy could destroy empires more completely than any war. Chapter 3. Apprentices in the Shadows. Centuries passed, but the galaxy did not know it was being hunted. The rule of two had taken root, invisible yet unyielding, moving through time like a serpent coiled around the heart of the Republic. No more legions, no more armies, only a line, a chain of masters and apprentices, each link forged in secrecy, each sharpened by betrayal. The Jedi, blind to the design, saw only peace. They congratulated themselves on the victory over the Sith, believing the darkness to be broken beyond repair. Their temples became quiet halls of scholars. Their knights became diplomats. The war-born vigilance of their ancestors dulled into ceremony and debate. In that silence, the Sith thrived. Each master chose an apprentice, not for loyalty, but for hunger. They sought ambition that burned cold, the kind that could wait decades. Without acting, the kind that could plot the death of a teacher while smiling at their side. A true Sith apprentice learned not only the Force, but patience, subtlety, deception. The chain of succession was never clean. Masters and apprentices were predators, and predators sometimes struck too soon. An apprentice who misjudged the moment would die before the master even reached for a blade. A master who grew complacent would not live to see another sunrise. It was not trust that bound them. It was the knowledge that the day of reckoning was inevitable. The holocrons speak of them in fragments, as if even memory itself feared to say their names too loudly. Darth Vectivus, who learned to twist the minds of senators while wearing the face of a kindly old merchant. Darth Gehenna, who burned entire cities in the night and vanished before the Jedi could arrive. Darth Andidu, who sought to cheat death itself, leaving behind a sarcophagus that would become legend. Some of these Sith ruled in the shadows for decades. Others barely survived a single year before the chain moved on. The galaxy saw their hands in strange events, but never knew their names. A war between noble houses on Corellia, sparked by a single forged letter. A trade route in the Mid-Rim destroyed by a swarm of pirates who vanished as quickly as they appeared. Assassinations disguised as accidents. Uprisings that began and ended within days. Fortunes made and lost in a single night. All threads pulled by unseen hands. The Jedi suspected nothing. They looked outward for enemies, never inward for the shadow that walked among them. And when they did sense something wrong, it was already too late. By the time a Jedi Master stood on the trail of the Sith, the culprit was already gone, or the Jedi was already dead. The Sith of the rule of two lived lives of masks. By day, they were senators, scholars, explorers, healers. By night, they were whisperers of chaos, architects of ruin. No one saw both faces and lived long enough to tell. The greatest challenge for any Sith under the rule of two was balance. An apprentice could not grow too quickly, or the master would see them as a threat and strike them down. A master could not grow too weak, or the apprentice would sense the moment to kill. Every conversation was a duel of words. Every lesson was a test, with only two outcomes, survival or death. But there was an elegance in the system. Over centuries, the weak were cold. Only those with cunning, patience, and power survived long enough to pass on the legacy. The rule of two was not simply a law. It was a crucible, burning away all but the strongest. The holocrons recall a phrase whispered in the tombs of Moraband. We are not many, because the many are weak. We are two, because the two are strong. Still, the path was never without risk. There were moments when the chain nearly broke, when a master died before the apprentice was ready, or when an apprentice perished before finding a successor. In those times, the dark side itself seemed to shudder, as if the entire legacy hung by a single thread. But the line endured. It always endured. Through the centuries, this hidden war shaped the galaxy without the galaxy's knowledge. The Jedi would fight pirates, Mandalorian clans, separatist movements, and think themselves keepers of peace, never knowing the Sith had lit those fires simply to watch how the Republic burned, and in the shadows, each apprentice carried the same unspoken oath: one day I will kill my master, and when I do, I will be stronger than they ever were. The rule of two was working. It was slow, patient, deliberate, and utterly unstoppable. Every century the Sith grew sharper, quieter, deadlier. The Jedi could not fight an enemy they could not see. It was not yet time for the galaxy to feel the blade. But the Sith were already sharpening it. Chapter 4, The Phantom Lineage. The rule of two was meant to be perfect. A chain unbroken. One master, one apprentice, each replacing the other in a cold, endless cycle. It was the purest distillation of the Sith, the survival of the cunning, the purging of the weak. But even the sharpest blade can chip, even the most flawless design can be bent. There were cracks in the chain, invisible at first, then widening with time. Some were born of ambition, too reckless to wait. Others from fear, the one weakness. The rule of two could not fully purge. In the forgotten chambers beneath the tombs of Moraband, the holocrons speak of them not as legends, but as warnings. They are the ghosts in the chain. The ones who wore the title of Darth, yet left no mark in the official line of succession. Sith who lived and died between the links, their existence erased by the master who sired them, or the apprentice, who destroyed them too soon. It began with secrets inside of secrets. A master, fearing the strength of their apprentice, might take another in secret, a shadow student, taught in whispers, hidden from the official gaze. Sometimes it was a child plucked from a distant world, other times a failed Jedi turned to the dark side for refuge. These shadow apprentices were insurance, a weapon in case the true heir turned to dangerous. But the rule of two was not built for deception within deception. When the hidden students discovered each other, blood followed. Sometimes the true apprentice would slay the pretender. Sometimes the pretender would kill the rightful heir, stepping into a role they were never meant to hold. And sometimes, most dangerously of all, both would survive, and the Sith would have three. 3 was not a number the rule could tolerate. There were also apprentices who sought power in forbidden places their masters could not follow. Holocrons locked behind rituals the master did not know. Dark temples on worlds that swallowed intruders whole. Knowledge that bent the dark side in ways the rule itself could not contain. Some returned stronger, their ambitions burning hotter than ever. Others never returned at all, claimed by the very forces they sought to command. The holocrons tell of Darth Collies, who vanished into the deep core for 30 years, and returned to being more shadow than flesh, of Darth Relkara, who raised a cult of assassins in secret, nearly revealing the Sith to the Jedi when her hidden army clashed with Republic forces. Of Darth Vader, who turned against both master and apprentice, declaring himself a third pillar in the Order, only to be erased from history when the two united to destroy him. And yet, the greatest danger to the rule of two was not rebellion. It was stagnation. There were masters who clung to life far too long, draining the vitality of their apprentices, denying them the chance to ascend. In these rare moments, the chain risked breaking, for if an apprentice died before taking a successor, the entire lineage could vanish in a single heartbeat. The phantom lineage is more than a name. It is a truth whispered to every apprentice as both a warning and a promise. The chain is fragile. If you are too patient, you may die before the moment comes. If you strike too soon, you may not be ready to survive. In this razor-thin balance lies the destiny of the Sith. There were times the rule of two nearly ended entirely. One holocron speaks of a century in which the Sith line was believed lost, both master and apprentice slain in a single ambush. But the truth, buried in the sands of Moraband, is that a hidden apprentice survived. Wounded, nameless, stripped of title, they crawled from the wreckage and began again, rebuilding the chain in absolute secrecy. The galaxy never knew how close it came to seeing the Sith truly die. This was the strength of the rule, and its weakness. It created Sith of unmatched cunning, yet left the Order hanging by the thinnest of threads. Every generation risked ending it forever. Every mistake could erase centuries of work, and still the Sith endured. Because the dark side does not choose the many, it chooses the few. And among the few, there is always one who survives. The Jedi never suspected the hidden scars in their enemy's history. To them, the Sith were extinct, then suddenly returned in the form of Darth Sidious. They never knew that between those 2 points lay centuries of near-death, betrayal, and resurrection. They never knew of the phantom heirs who carried the flame. Through darkness so deep it almost went out. The rule of two was not unbreakable. It was simply unbroken, and that was enough. Chapter 5. The Seed of Sidious. From the shifting shadows of the Phantom lineage emerged a figure unlike any who had come before, a Sith Lord whose hunger was tempered not by caution alone, but by a cold, calculating patience that seemed almost unnatural. His name was Darth Plagueis, though few in the galaxy would ever hear it. Even fewer would live after speaking it. Plagueis did not see the rule of two as a mere law to obey. He saw it as a living experiment, one he intended to perfect. Where other masters sought to dominate the galaxy through war, Plagueis sought to dominate it through inevitability. Why fight battles when you could shape the world in such a way that the battles were already won before the first blow was struck? He was a scholar of the Force's deepest and most forbidden mysteries, not merely content with controlling minds or toppling governments. He looked to the very essence of life itself. The old Sith had dreamed of immortality in crude forms, amulets, rituals, grotesque alchemy, but Plagueis stripped away the superstition and approached the question as a scientist. To him, the Force was not a god to be worshipped. It was a field to be studied, harnessed, bent to the will of those clever enough to understand it. His research led him to experiments that would horrify even the darkest of Sith. Whispers speak of chambers filled with living test subjects. Their bodies altered, their lifespans stretched or cut short at his whim. Entire bloodlines were manipulated, their fates rewritten for purposes they would never comprehend. Some say he could sense the moment of death approaching in a living being and pull it back like a tide. Others say he could touch the Force in such a way that a life could begin where none had been before. But even Plagueis knew the rule of two could not be ignored. To break it was to court destruction. So, with meticulous care, he chose his apprentice. His choice was not born of sentiment. He did not seek loyalty, for loyalty was weakness. He sought potential, the kind of potential that could not be contained by lesser Sith. He found it on Naboo, in a young man named Palpatine. Palpatine was not yet a name known in the galaxy. He was a politician's son, sharp-minded, soft-spoken, his smile a weapon as sharp as any blade. Plagueis saw in him the rarest of combinations, ambition without haste, charm without conscience. The boy could kill with words as easily as others could with sabers, and just as effectively. The training was slow, deliberate. Plagueis poured his knowledge into Palpatine like venom into a cup, each drop carefully measured. He taught him the arts of persuasion, the mathematics of power, the truth that the galaxy's rulers were slaves to greed, fear, and vanity. He taught him how to hide in plain sight, how to stand in the center of 1,000 eyes and be invisible to all of them. Palpatine learned quickly, too quickly. There were moments when Plagueis sensed the ambition growing like a hidden blade between them, but he welcomed it. For in his arrogance, Plagueis believed he had found the perfect refinement of the rule of two. A master who would never be overthrown because he would never allow his apprentice the chance. And so, the seed of Sidious was planted. On Naboo, Palpatine began weaving threads into the Senate, into trade guilds, into the whispers of the criminal underworld. He wore masks upon masks, the loyal public servant, the charming senator, the harmless aristocrat. But beneath each mask was another, and beneath them all was the Sith. Plagueis believed he was shaping the perfect heir. In truth, he was building the instrument of his own destruction. The holocrons speak of this period as a time of silence before the storm. The Jedi were blind to the danger, not because they could not sense the dark side, but because it was buried so deep in layers of deception that it felt like nothing at all. They searched for armies, for open threats, for battles they could fight with blades. They never thought to look for the shadow sitting quietly in there. Senate chambers, Plagueis' plan was bold, to use Palpatine not as a weapon of war, but as the very leader of the Republic itself. With one hand, they would control the law. With the other, they would control the chaos. And in the perfect moment, the Republic would willingly give itself to Sith rule without ever realizing it had been conquered. But the rule of two is not a path to shared glory. It is a path to solitary power. And though the seed was planted with care, Plagueis forgot the truth. Every master must remember, seeds grow into trees that cast their own shadows. In time, the apprentice would take everything. But that is the next chapter's story. Chapter 6. The Master Who Lived to Long. Darth Plagueis, the Dark Lord of the Sith, was a master obsessed, not with conquest of the galaxy, but with the conquest of death itself. For years, he bent the Force to his will, studying its deepest, most forbidden secrets. He sought immortality, not as a gift to the galaxy, nor as a tool to empower the Sith as a whole, but as the ultimate safeguard for his own reign. Yet, in doing so, Plagueis violated the unspoken rhythm of the Sith, the rule of two. That ancient law dictated that the apprentice must one day surpass and destroy the master, ensuring the Sith would grow stronger with each generation. But Plagueis had no desire to be surpassed. In his arrogance, he sought to cheat this cycle entirely, imagining himself as the eternal master, a dark shadow stretching endlessly across history. But while Plagueis searched for the secret to eternal life, his apprentice, Darth Sidious, searched for something else, power in its purest form. Sidious understood that the dark side rewarded hunger, ambition, and change. Stagnation was weakness, and weakness was death. And so, one silent night, in the privacy of their quarters, the rule of two reasserted itself with cruel precision. There was no grand battle, no lightsaber duel, no dramatic declaration, only the quiet betrayal that has ended countless Sith legacies. Plagueis, the master who believed he could never die, was struck down in his sleep. In that moment, the master became nothing, and the apprentice became everything. Sidious inherited not only Plagueis' knowledge, but his seat as the Dark Lord of the Sith, yet he carried no illusions of eternity. Sidious would live for power, and when the day came, he would face death as all Sith must, by ensuring that when it came for him, it came too late to stop his will from consuming the galaxy. Chapter 7. Sidious and the Web of Deceit, now Soul. Master of the Sith, Darth Sidious stood upon the precipice of an age that would belong to him alone. His master, Darth Plagueis, lay cold and forgotten. Another casualty of the ancient rule of two. The galaxy, in its naive bliss, celebrated the Republic's 1,000 years of peace, a peace Sidious knew was nothing more than the complacency of a blind order. The Jedi had grown fat on their own legend, deaf to the whispers of shadows that moved around them. Sidious would not remain in the shadows. His genius demanded a stage. He did not hide in forgotten ruins or secret lairs. He hid in plain sight, in the heart of Coruscant itself, where the light of the Republic burned brightest. Beneath the white spires of the Senate and the endless chatter of politicians, the true work of the Sith began. Sidious became a man of smiles and handshakes, of carefully measured words, each calculated to draw threads into his web. The genius of his deception lay in its inversion. The Jedi expected their enemies to strike from the darkness, to wield fear, like a blade. But Sidious wielded trust as his weapon. He made allies of the unsuspecting and servants of the ambitious. every senator who owed him a favor, every guildmaster whose greed he fed, every system whose desperation he nurtured, all became strands of the net he cast across the galaxy. Here, the rule of two evolved. For 1,000 years, the Sith had been predators in the night, their apprentices little more than extensions of the Master's will, blades honed for single strikes. Sidious envisioned something greater. His apprentice would not simply kill, they would rule. They would be the embodiment of his empire, to be the iron fist behind the velvet glove. Darth Maul was that first experiment. Raised in darkness from birth, molded into a creature of pure hatred, Maul was unleashed upon the galaxy not as a schemer but as a storm. His rage was meant to be seen, to terrify, to distract, while Maul drew the Jedi's attention with crimson. Blade and acrobatic fury, Sidious moved unseen through the corridors of power to the Senate. He was merely a rising star among politicians, a man of Naboo with the easy charm of a diplomat and the quiet wisdom of a statesman. To the Trade Federation, he was a shadowy benefactor, promising them immunity and profit if they played their part in his plans. To the Jedi, or so he intended, he was invisible. The galaxy did not know it yet, but the age of the Sith had already begun. The first seeds had been planted, trade disputes engineered to stir unrest. Star systems pushed to the brink of rebellion, the Republic's bureaucratic machinery subtly jammed by design. And through it all, Sidious smiled. In secret, he whispered the ancient mantras of the Sith, not to inspire his apprentice, but to bind him. Maul's mind was not trained for doubt or ambition. It was trained for obedience. In this way, Sidious sought to avoid the endless cycle of betrayal that had plagued the Sith for generations. But the rule of two was a cruel law, older than Sidious, and as inevitable as gravity. It demanded more than loyalty. It demanded that the apprentice one day replace the master. Sidious believed he could shape that inevitability to his will, bending even the ancient laws to serve his design. For now, Maul was his sword, his hammer, his distraction, and so the web grew, strand by strand, as Sidious walked both worlds, the hidden master of the Sith and the public servant of the Republic. In the shadows, he moved his apprentice like a chess piece, placing him where the Jedi would see him, where the Council would underestimate the danger. In the light, he built alliances and debts, quietly arranging the Republic into a structure that, when the moment came, would not need to be conquered, only claimed. By the time the galaxy realized the trap, Sidious knew it would be far too late. The Jedi would look up from their meditations to find themselves already caught in his web, struggling as the strands tightened around them. And when that day came, the rule of two would not simply survive, it would reign. Chapter 8. The fall of Maul. Darth Maul had been bred for one purpose, to destroy the enemies of his master. From the moment Sidious plucked him from the shadows of Dathomir, Maul's life had been a crucible of pain and discipline. Every scar on his flesh was a lesson. Every strike endured was a reminder that the Sith path was one of relentless survival. In him, Sidious had forged a living weapon, a blade that knew only one edge forward. When the time came to reveal Maul to the galaxy, Sidious did not send him quietly. He unleashed him like a phantom from nightmare, crimson blade ignited, face painted in the black and dread patterns of fear. Maul's first true test came on the desert world of Tatooine, where he emerged from the dunes like a spectre to hunt the Jedi. His movements were as fluid as they were deadly. Each spin, each leap was the culmination of years of brutal training. But Maul was not a schemer. He was not meant for the subtleties of Sidious's grand design. His purpose was distraction, intimidation, bloodshed, and in that role he excelled. The Jedi had not faced a Sith in a millennium. His sudden appearance was like the return of a forgotten nightmare. The trap that drew Maul into his fateful duel was not of his own making. On Naboo, Sidious had engineered a conflict that would draw both the Jedi and the Trade Federation into a public confrontation. While politicians debated in marble halls, Maul stalked the corridors of Theed, waiting for the chance to strike. His double-bladed lightsaber, a rarity even among the Sith, burned like a red crescent of death against Jedi Master Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice. Obi-Wan Kenobi Maul was a storm given form. Every strike was meant to kill, every movement a lethal dance choreographed over a lifetime. He fought with the fury of one who had been denied the galaxy for too long. For a time, it seemed the Jedi might fall, and yet, the galaxy turns on. Moments, not on destinies. In one fateful instant, Maul allowed triumph to overtake discipline. After felling Qui-Gon with a single, brutal thrust, he toyed with the younger Jedi, a miscalculation no Sith should make. Obi-Wan, driven by rage and grief, seized the moment. With a sudden leap from the pit where Maul had left him to die, Kenobi's blade found its mark. Maul's world ended in that instant. Pain exploded through him as the lightsaber sliced through flesh and bone. The lower half of his body fell into the abyss, while the upper clung to life through sheer hatred. He tumbled into darkness, abandoned by the Force itself. Far away, Sidious felt the wound in the web he had woven. His apprentice, the weapon he had honed for years, was gone. And yet Sidious did not mourn. The rule of two allowed no room for sentiment. An apprentice who fell to a Jedi was an apprentice who had failed. For Sidious, the loss was not personal, it was opportunity. Maul had been a tool, effective, yes, but limited. The Sith did not cling to broken weapons. In Maul's absence, the rule of two demanded a replacement, one more fitting for the next stage of the plan. The galaxy was on the brink of transformation, and Sidious required an apprentice who could command armies, not simply swing a blade. Still, Maul's fall served a purpose. His defeat had lulled the Jedi into a false sense of victory. They believed the Sith threat ended with his death, that the shadow had receded. The Council did not suspect that Sidious remained, patient as ever, watching from within the Senate. This miscalculation would be their undoing. In the cold months that followed, Sidious turned his attention to the noble Count of Sereno, a man of power, wealth, and disillusionment. Dooku had already begun to lose faith in the Jedi Order's stagnant ways, his aristocratic pride chafing under the Council's authority. Sidious saw in him not the raw fury of Maul, but the elegance of a master tactician. Where Maul had been a dagger in the dark, Dooku would be a general on the battlefield. And in the rule of two, every apprentice was also a promise, the promise that one day the Master's vision would be made complete, even if it meant the Master's death. Sidious believed he could shape that promise to his own survival. Maul, broken and forgotten, would not trouble Sidious again. Or so the Master believed. For though Maul's body had been shattered, his will endured. Deep in the wastelands of forgotten worlds, the fallen Sith would one day crawl back into the galaxy, driven not by duty to the Sith, but by a singular obsession, vengeance. But that was a story for another time. For now, Sidious's gaze had shifted to a new piece on the board, one that would help him set the galaxy ablaze. Chapter 9, Tyrannus and the Clone War. Count Dooku of Sereno had once been among the Jedi Order's brightest stars, a master of form to lightsaber combat, a diplomat of unmatched grace, and a man whose presence commanded respect in any chamber. But beneath the polished veneer of the Jedi Master lay a nobleman's pride, a heritage steeped in power and expectation. The Republic's endless bureaucracy, the corruption in its Senate, and the Jedi Council's willful blindness to both had long since worn away his faith. Sidious knew this. He had been watching Dooku for years, whispering to him through carefully chosen intermediaries, fanning the embers of his discontent until they became a flame. The Jedi saw Dooku's departure from their ranks as a sad inevitability, the retirement of a weary knight. They could not fathom that he had already stepped onto the path of the Sith. When they finally met in shadow, Sidious offered not power, but purpose. You see the truth, my friend. The Republic rots from within, and the Jedi are too blind to act. Join me, and we shall remake it in order, in strength. Dooku, already half convinced, yielded fully. And in that moment, Count Dooku became Darth Tyrannus, Dark Lord of the Sith, and heir to the rule of two, where Darth Maul had been a weapon of brute force. Tyrannus was a master strategist. He wielded diplomacy like a lightsaber, cutting through the tangled loyalties of star systems and bending them to his cause. Sidious charged him with a monumental task: to fracture the galaxy itself, to draw systems away from the Republic under the banner of secession. Tyrannus did not merely rally discontented worlds, he built a movement. He courted the Trade Federation, the banking clan, the techno-union, and countless guilds, offering them wealth and autonomy in exchange for loyalty. Sidious stood behind it all, unseen, pulling strings so that both sides of the coming war would answer to him alone. It was Tyrannus who commissioned the creation of a grand army, but not for the Separatists, in secret on the storm-lashed world of Kamino. Clone troopers were bred under a false order, purportedly authorized by the Jedi Council. These soldiers would one day serve the Republic and Sidious in the war he was already orchestrating. Thus the trap was set: an army for the Republic, an army for the Separatists, both funded, supplied, and commanded by the Sith. The galaxy would be torn apart by a war whose every casualty brought Sidious closer to absolute power. The Jedi, bound by their oaths, became generals overnight. They led clone armies bred for obedience, never suspecting that the chains around those soldiers' minds were also the chains around their own. Tyrannus played his role flawlessly: the enemy the Republic needed, the commander who could challenge even Yoda in combat. In battle, Tyrannus was elegance incarnate. His curved-hilted lightsaber flowed through the air like a ribbon of red flame, each strike calculated, each movement designed to unbalance his foes. He struck down Jedi not with rage, but with the cold efficiency of a duelist. To him, the war was not chaos, it was a chessboard, and he was the queen, moving with perfect freedom. And yet, for all his skill and intellect, Tyrannus was still bound by the rule of two. In Sidious's eyes, an apprentice was never an equal, only a step toward something greater. Sidious already had his eyes on a new heir, one more powerful than any before, one who could serve as both enforcer and instrument of destiny. Tyrannus sensed this. In quiet moments, he considered the inevitability of the rule. He had replaced Maul. One day, someone would replace him. The thought bred a simmering tension between master and apprentice, each testing the other in subtle ways. Yet both understood the greater game, the galaxy's fate, and for now, they played their parts. The Clone War unfolded exactly as Sidious had foreseen. Entire sectors burned, worlds fell, and the Jedi Order stretched itself thin across 1,000 battlefronts. Tyrannus thrived in this chaos. Every Republic victory came at a cost, Every separatist defeat served a larger plan, no matter which side claimed the day. Sidious's hand was the one that moved the pieces in private. Tyrannus sometimes wondered whether the war's true purpose was to destroy the Republic's enemies, or to destroy the Republic itself. But the power Sidious offered was intoxicating, and the vision he painted of a new empire was too grand to resist. What Tyrannus did not see, or perhaps refused to admit, was that the war was also a forge, and in that forge Sidious was tempering. A new apprentice, one whose rise would come not through gradual grooming, but through the fire of betrayal. For now, the galaxy bled. The Senate granted the Chancellor more and more authority in the name of security. The Jedi found themselves distrusted by the very people they defended. The Separatists grew more desperate, their cause more fanatical, and, above it all, in the shadows where no one thought to look, Sidious smiled. Chapter 10, The Chosen One in the Web from the Moment. Sheev Palpatine laid eyes on the boy from Tatooine. He knew Anakin Skywalker was unlike any being in the galaxy, a storm contained within flesh and bone. The Jedi whispered that he was the Chosen One, born of the Force itself, destined to bring balance. Sidious heard the prophecy as well, but to him, balance was not the Jedi's goal. Balance meant the dark side in ascendance, the light dimmed to a flicker. In Anakin he saw the perfect vessel for this vision. Anakin's journey had begun in slavery, his chains broken not by the Republic but by chance, or perhaps the will of the Force itself. But to Sidious, such beginnings were ideal. The boy had known powerlessness. He would crave strength, and Sidious would be the one to give it to him. Over the years, Sidious wove himself into Anakin's life with the precision of a spider tending its web. At first his gestures were small, words of praise when others withheld it, an understanding ear when the Jedi Council offered only caution. He never pushed, never commanded. He simply listened and planted seeds. Anakin was a Jedi in name, but his heart beat to a different rhythm. He chafed against the Council's rules, questioned their orders, and sought a freedom they could not grant. Sidious positioned himself as the one man in the Republic who understood him completely. During the Clone War, this bond deepened. Anakin became a hero to the people, his victories broadcast across the galaxy. The Senate cheered him, the soldiers idolized him, but the Council remained wary, unwilling to grant him the rank of Master despite his accomplishments. Sidious saw in this a wound, and he pressed upon it gently, carefully. They do not trust you, my boy. They fear your power. The words were always framed as concern, never accusation. Sidious knew the boy's heart, loyal to a fault, yet aching for recognition. And beneath that loyalty simmered a fear that Anakin could never admit, the fear of losing those he loved. When Anakin confided his visions of Padme's death, Sidious recognized his moment. The Jedi would tell him to let go, to accept the will of the Force. Sidious told him there was another way. He spoke of ancient Sith legends, of powers that could preserve life itself, powers the Jedi would never teach. Only through me can you achieve a power greater than any Jedi. The hook was set. All that remained was to tighten the strands of the web until the boy could no longer escape. Meanwhile, Tyrannus still served as Sidious's apprentice, commanding the Separatists, ensuring the war bled on. But Tyrannus was no longer the heir. Not truly. Sidious had already chosen his successor. Anakin was everything the Sith dreamed of: raw strength, unshaped ambition, and a destiny that could shatter the old order. the challenge lay in turning. Him, the Jedi, were his family, the Order, his creed. Sidious could not simply demand his allegiance. He had to make the Jedi drive Anakin to him. The Council's mistrust made this easier. When they ordered Anakin to spy on the Chancellor, his own mentor, it was the final insult. To Anakin, it was betrayal. To Sidious, it was the closing of the trap. In private, Sidious began to reveal more of his true nature, just enough to provoke the right questions. He did not deny being a Sith. Instead, he reframed it as an alternative philosophy, one grounded in passion, freedom, and the will to protect what mattered most. The Jedi, he claimed, were hypocrites, preaching peace while waging war, demanding selflessness while hoarding power for themselves. The tension reached its peak during the Battle of Coruscant. Tyrannus faced Anakin in combat, expecting to best the younger Jedi, or at least hold him at bay. But Anakin's fury was a torrent Tyrannus could not withstand. When the Count fell to his knees, disarmed, Sidious gave the final nudge. Do it. The blade fell. Tyrannus's head rolled, and with it, the last obstacle to Anakin's place at Sidious's side was removed. The web tightened. Still, Sidious played the long game. He did not crown Anakin immediately. He allowed the Jedi to make their final mistake, to move against him openly, to brand themselves as traitors to the Republic. In doing so, they would force Anakin to choose. The boy's choice would change the galaxy, and deep within his private chambers, Sidious could almost hear the ancient rule of two whispering through the ages. It had waited 1,000 years for this moment, for this apprentice. Soon, the prophecy would be fulfilled, not in the Jedi's favor, but in the Sith's. Chapter 11, The Death of Tyrannus Heir aboard the Invisible Hand, was thick with smoke and the metallic taste of ozone. Somewhere deep in the Separatist flagship, Count Dooku, Darth Tyrannus, awaited his moment. For years, he had served his master with precision, commanding the Separatist armies, bleeding the Republic dry, and bending entire star systems to the Sith's will. He believed himself indispensable, the right hand of Darth Sidious. What he did not know, what he could not imagine, was that he had already been condemned. The battle above Coruscant had been orchestrated by Sidious from the first move. The Separatists had struck not to win, but to lure the Republic's greatest champion into a trap. Chancellor Palpatine's capture was a performance, a carefully staged drama meant to set the board for a single, decisive move, the replacement of an apprentice. When the doors to the general's chamber slid open, Dooku expected another skirmish, another chance to measure Anakin Skywalker's progress. The boy had grown in skill since Geonosis, but Dooku still saw him as an impulsive student, not yet refined. Anakin entered with Obi-Wan Kenobi at his side. The duel began as so many had before, the red arc of Tyrannus's curved blade against the blue and green of the Jedi. Dooku was elegance incarnate, each strike calculated, each parry measured. He disarmed Kenobi with practiced ease, sending the Jedi Master sprawling unconscious to the floor. It was then that Anakin changed. The boy fought not with patience, but with a fury that seemed to burn hotter with every exchange. Dooku found himself driven back step by step, his defenses unraveling under the relentless assault. This was not the careful form to duelist he had trained to best. This was something raw, primal, dangerous, and then Anakin's blade struck true. Tyrannus's hands were severed in a blur of motion, his lightsaber falling uselessly to the deck. He collapsed to his knees, breathing hard, staring up at his opponents, and at the man he still believed to be his master's disguise. Palpatine's voice was quiet, almost gentle. "Good, Anakin, good. Tyrannus's mind world. This was not the plan. Sidious had promised him survival, had spoken of a galaxy ruled together once the Jedi were broken. But the look in Palpatine's eyes told a different story. One of cold calculation and finality. Then came the command, "Kill him," for a heartbeat. Anakin hesitated. The Jedi Code forbade such executions. Dooku saw his opening to speak, to plead, to reveal the truth, but no words came. The shock of betrayal was a weight on his chest. Palpatine leaned forward, his voice a serpent's hiss. "Do it." In that instant, Dooku understood. He had been a means to an end. The rule of two demanded that the strong replaced the weak, and in Sidious's eyes, he was no longer strong. Anakin's blade flashed. Tyrannus's head fell, his body slumping forward in silence. There was no ceremony, no farewell. The master he had served for over a decade did not even glance at his corpse. In the grand design of the Sith, apprentices were as replaceable as soldiers on a battlefield. Anakin stood there, breathing heavily, the weight of what he had done already sinking in. Palpatine's voice was smooth, reassuring, as though the killing were nothing more than a necessary step. He was too dangerous to be kept alive. What Anakin could not see, what Sidious knew all too well, was that this act had severed the last threads, tying him to the Jedi. Tyrannus's death was not simply the fall of an apprentice. It was the blood oath of a new one. For Sidious, the transition was seamless. In the same breath that dismissed the old, he claimed the new. Darth Tyrannus was gone. Darth Vader waited to be born. The galaxy would remember the death of Count Dooku as a strategic victory in the Clone War, a blow to the Separatist command structure. The Jedi would mark it as a troubling sign of Anakin's growing ruthlessness. But for the Sith, it was something far older. The renewal of the rule of two in the only way it had ever been renewed, through betrayal, blood, and the rise of the Stronger. Chapter 12. Vader's Ascension. The galaxy believed the war was nearly over. The Separatists were fractured, their leaders scattered, their fleets dwindling. In the Senate, emergency powers had become permanent, and Chancellor Palpatine ruled with the ease of a man whose authority was unquestioned. But beneath the polished surface of politics, a storm was gathering, one that would sweep away the Jedi, the Republic, and everything the galaxy had known for 1,000 years. At the center of that storm stood Anakin Skywalker. Dooku's death had changed him. In battle, he was more decisive, more ruthless. The line between Jedi discipline and unrestrained power blurred with every duel. Yet the Council continued to withhold what he desired most: trust, recognition, and the rank of Master. Each refusal drove the wedge deeper, and in the cracks, Palpatine's voice grew louder. Anakin's nightmares of Padme's death became more vivid. He awoke in the night, drenched in sweat, the images seared into his mind, her face pale, her body lifeless in his arms. The Jedi's counsel to let go felt like cruelty. Palpatine offered something far different. The dark side is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. The words were honeyed poison. They promised salvation at any cost. Sidious spoke of an ancient Sith legend, of a master who had conquered death itself. Whether it was truth or fabrication hardly mattered to Anakin. It was hope, and hope in the hands of a Sith was a chain stronger than any forged of iron. When the Jedi finally moved against the Chancellor, they played directly into his hands. Mace Windu led the charge, lightsaber ignited, determined to end the war in a single strike. Anakin arrived in time to witness the duel, and the moment of Sidious's feigned helplessness. Windu's blade was poised to end the Chancellor's life when Anakin made his choice. It was not the Jedi Code that guided his hand, it was fear. With a single blow, Windu was cast from the window, his body tumbling into the Coruscant night. In the silence that followed, Anakin stood trembling, the weight of his choice pressing upon him. Sidious's voice was low, almost reverent. "You are fulfilling your destiny, Anakin. Become my apprentice." And so he did. Kneeling before the Dark Lord of the Sith, the Jedi Knight was gone. In his place stood Darth Vader, servant to the new order that would rise from the ashes of the old. The transformation was swift. Wasted no time in binding his new apprentice to him, sending Vader to the Jedi Temple at the head of the 501st Legion. Together they slaughtered those who had once been comrades, knights, Padawans, even younglings. Vader's blade burned through the halls like a scythe through ripe grain. Across the galaxy, Order 66 was executed. The clone troopers, loyal to the Republic and programmed for obedience, turned on their Jedi generals. One by one, the defenders of peace fell to blaster fire and betrayal. In hours, the Jedi Order was broken. Vader's armor came later, the black carapace that would make him a figure of terror for generations. But even before the mask, he was already the enforcer Sidious had envisioned, unstoppable, unquestioning, and bound by chains of rage and loss. His love for Padme, once his anchor, became the very reason for his enslavement. Every act of violence, every atrocity, was justified in his mind as a step toward saving her. Yet Sidious had planted something deeper than loyalty. Doubt. He ensured Vader believed he could not survive without his master's guidance, that his power was incomplete. Without the dark side's teachings, Vader might one day dream of overthrowing Sidious, but for now, he was the perfect weapon in the Senate chamber. Palpatine declared the Republic dead. In its place, the Galactic Empire was born to ensure the security and continuing stability of the galaxy. The senators erupted in applause, too blinded by fear and relief to see the chains closing around them. The Sith had triumphed. For the first time in 1,000 years, the rule of two stood atop the galaxy. Sidious, the Master, and Vader, the Apprentice, a dynasty of darkness ruling over trillions. Yet the nature of the rule remained unchanged. The Master would one day expect the Apprentice to rise against him, and the Apprentice would one day dream of that moment. Until then, the galaxy would kneel. Vader stood at the Emperor's side, the weight of his new name settling upon him. In his mind, he told himself it was worth it, that Padme would live, that all of this had been for her. But in the deepest, quietest corner of his heart, a shadow of Anakin Skywalker still lingered, a shadow that one day perhaps would awaken. For now, the mask was complete. The Jedi were gone, the Republic was no more, and the galaxy belonged to the Sith. The web Sidious had woven over decades was now a shroud, draped across the stars, and in that silence the Dark Lord smiled. Chapter 13, The Secret War of the Rule the Galaxy, saw only the armor, the breath, the towering shadow at the Emperor's side. But the truth, recorded here and hidden from the weak, is that Darth Vader's service was never a simple oath of loyalty. It was war, a war fought in silence, in thought, and in the currents of the Force. From the moment Sidious named him apprentice, The rule of two bound their fates together in blood and inevitability. The Sith do not share power. They do not rule as equals. They are predator and prey, bound by a law older than the Republic itself. To there shall be, no more, no less. One to embody power, the other to crave it. Sidious embodied it, or so. He believed his mastery was absolute. His rise to Emperor of the known galaxy was the culmination of centuries of Sith schemes. But power does not stand still. In the shadows of his own throne, the one who craved Vader was meant, in time, to rise against him. And yet, decades passed, the galaxy burned, Jedi temples fell to ruin, worlds were enslaved in the name of order. Still, Vader did not strike. Still Sidious reigned. This is the first great truth that the weak never see. The rule of two is not a duel fought with blades alone. It is fought with patience, with layers of deception so deep that even a master of the Force may mistake obedience. For loyalty, Vader wore his chains, not because he had forgotten the law, but because he understood it better than any before him. The war between master and apprentice was not waged in the open. It took place in subtle manipulations, in the testing of boundaries, in the smallest hesitations before obedience. Every mission Sidious assigned was a move in an unseen game. Every victory Vader won was weighed against the risk of revealing his hunger too soon. Sometimes the Emperor would feed that hunger deliberately, granting Vader small triumphs, a fleet to command, a rival to crush, a new apprentice to hunt and destroy. Each time Sidious watched carefully, gauging the moment his servant might turn. Vader, for his part, learned to cloak his ambitions so deeply in the cold iron of his will that even the Emperor's piercing gaze found no clear treachery. The galaxy believed they ruled as one. The truth is, they ruled against each other. 1,000 times the thought of betrayal passed through Vader's mind, and 1,000 times he let it pass. Not because fear bound him, but because patience sharpened him. Sidious himself was no fool. He knew that the day of challenge must come. The rule of two demands it as surely as the stars demand night. Yet he also believed he could twist the rule to his advantage, that he might replace his apprentice with another before the blow fell. In this, he revealed his own weakness, the belief that he could outplay the nature of the dark side itself. And so the secret war continued. Neither side striking, both preparing. Vader sought not merely to kill his master, but to be ready to win. Sidious sought not merely to survive, but to ensure that when the challenge came, it would end in the apprentice's ruin. Years bled into decades. Armies rose and fell. The empires. Enemies were crushed in battles that echoed across systems. But none of those wars mattered as much as the one that never showed its face. This war, silent, cold, and unending, was the true heart of the SITH. It was a war fought in sidelong glances, and in the careful selection of words. It was in the moments when Sidious's hand hovered over a potential successor, only for Vader to eliminate them before they could be named. It was in the way Vader, on rare occasions, defied orders in ways too subtle to punish, but enough to remind the Emperor that the chain was not unbreakable. Even the galaxy's greatest battles, the siege of Mon Cala, the purge of the Mustafar, insurgents, the shadow campaigns along the mid-rim, were but distractions from this private duel. The rule of two is not about numbers. It is about inevitability. The master knows the apprentice will one day seek to kill them. The apprentice knows the master expects it. This knowledge does not weaken them. It is the source of their strength. But in the story of Darth Vader and Darth Sidious, something unique unfolded. The war did not erupt when expected. It brewed for so long that it became part of the order of things, and in that delay, both gained power, and both became vulnerable. For the Force does not forget the law. The dark side does not tolerate a master who cannot be overthrown, nor an apprentice who will not rise. The longer the rule of two is left unfulfilled, the greater the tension within the Force itself, a tension that demands release. And when that release came, it did not come as either had foreseen. Chapter 14. The hope that Sidious did not see the galaxy's greatest threats often emerge from the shadows. Assassins, insurgents, fallen Jedi, these are the enemies the Sith expect. Darth Sidious had faced them all, crushed them all, and learned to see their coming long before their blades were drawn. But Luke Skywalker was different. He came not from darkness, but from light. And it was this radiant defiance, that blinded the Emperor to the danger before him. Luke was born of the very man Sidious had spent decades shaping into a weapon. The son of Anakin Skywalker, hidden from the Emperor's reach, grew up beneath twin suns, far from the suffocating grip of the Empire. No palace shadows darkened his youth. No whisper of the Sith tainted his earliest steps. The Force touched him as it had touched his father, but without the chains of fear Sidious had wrapped around Anakin's heart. The Emperor's spies first brought whispers of him, a pilot, a rebel, a thorn in the side of Imperial forces. Sidious barely looked up from his own schemes. The boy was nothing then, a speck of light in the endless dark. But light, as the Sith have always known, is not harmless. A single flame can burn the forest to ash. It was only after Luke destroyed the Death Star, a weapon Sidious had intended as a symbol of invincible Imperial power, that the Emperor's gaze truly turned toward him. Here was a pilot with unnatural reflexes, a leader whose courage rallied armies, a being whose destiny seemed to echo a name Sidious thought long dead. Skywalker Dr. Sidious. This was not a threat, not yet. This was opportunity. He saw in Luke the same potential he had once seen in Anakin, a vessel for the dark side, a successor who could one day replace the apprentice who had grown more machine than man. Vader was powerful but broken. Luke was unscarred, unshaped. The Emperor believed he could mold him into the perfect heir. But Vader saw something else entirely. When the Emperor revealed Luke's name, when he spoke of the boy's heritage, a spark long buried in Vader's shattered heart stirred. It was not yet hope that was a word the Sith despised, but something dangerously close to it. Sidious spoke of recruitment, of seduction to the dark side. Vader heard a different truth, a son, a chance, however slim, at redemption through blood. The Emperor could not see this. His vision, sharpened by decades of manipulation, was also narrowed by arrogance. He believed he understood every possible outcome of the rule of two. He believed he could orchestrate the confrontation between master-apprentice and heir, turning it to his advantage. In this belief, he was already defeated. Luke's strength lay not only in his connection to the Force, but in the way he resisted its corruption. Where others would have been tempted by Sidious's promises of power, Luke's instinct was to protect, to heal, to preserve. Sidious thought this weakness. Vader knew it was the one thing that could shatter the chain between master and apprentice forever. And so began another war within the war. Sidious moved to bring Luke into the fold of the Sith. Vader sought to bring him into his own fold, not as an apprentice to overthrow the Emperor, but as a son to overthrow the very nature of the Sith. The Emperor whispered from afar, weaving his web. Vader reached out through battle and blood, testing Luke, urging him to join, not the dark side alone, but himself. For years, the holocron records, Sith Masters, have underestimated the power of love. Not the feeble affection the Jedi preach, but the fierce, possessive love of the Sith, the desire to claim, to protect what is one's own. Sidious had underestimated it when he sought to steal Anakin from the Jedi. Now, he underestimated it again when he sought to steal Luke from Vader. The galaxy did not see these hidden moves. To them, Luke was merely a rebel commander, hunted by the Empire's most feared enforcer. They could not know that behind every lightsaber clash, every breath drawn through that mask, there was a deeper battle being waged, not for Luke's life, but for his soul. Sidious believed he could twist Luke into another Darth Vader. Vader believed he could twist Luke into something else, something that would break both the Emperor's reign and the ancient cycle of master and heir. It was here, in this threefold struggle between light, dark, and blood, that the rule of two began to crack. Sidious, in his hunger for a stronger apprentice, sowed the seed of his own destruction. Vader, in his hunger for something beyond power, nurtured it. Luke, in his refusal to bend, brought it to life, and so the stage was set. The Emperor watched the boy as a predator watches prey, confident in the hunt. Vader watched him as a father watches a child stepping into danger, willing to risk everything to save him. And Luke walked toward them both, not knowing that in his hands lay the fate of the Sith, the Empire, and the prophecy that neither master nor apprentice truly understood. The Emperor saw an heir, Vader saw a son. The galaxy saw only a boy, but the dark side. The dark side saw the storm coming. Chapter 15. The breaking of the rule of two, had endured for over 1,000 years. It had seen empires rise and fall, seen the Sith survive extinction and return from shadows deeper than death itself. It was a law older than the Republic, older than the Jedi Order as it was known. To there shall be, no more, no less, one master, one apprentice. The bond between them was not love, nor trust. It was a chain forged of ambition, sharpened by betrayal. It was meant to end only one way, in the Emperor's throne room aboard the second Death Star. That law stood at the edge of fulfillment. The Master sat upon his seat of power, shrouded in black, his voice dripping with the poison of certainty. The apprentice knelt before him, clad in black armor, his every breath a rasping reminder of the chains that bound him. And between them, the boy, Luke Skywalker, unbroken by temptation, stood where no Jedi had stood before, not as prey to the Sith, but as the fulcrum upon which their entire order would balance. Sidious saw only a weapon to be claimed. Vader saw something else, something that even now he could not fully name without betraying himself. The Emperor's plan was as old as the rule itself: tempt the apprentice's heir, turn him against his master, and in the chaos of betrayal seize victory. Vader had done the same to Dooku. Sidious had done the same to Plagueis. It was the cycle: hunger, challenge, ascension. But as the boy refused, again and again, to strike in anger, the rhythm of the cycle began to falter. The Emperor's smile did not fade. He was certain the final push would come. His taunts were knives meant to carve rage into the boy's heart. Every word, every cackle, was a spark meant to ignite the fire of the dark side. Luke's resolve held. And then, at last, Sidious abandoned words for lightning. The throne room lit with the raw fury of the dark side arcs of power searing through the boy's body. It was more than pain. It was annihilation. The Emperor's power poured into him, shredding his resistance, stripping away every defense. Luke's voice, once firm, broke into cries of desperation. His call for help tore through the air, and Vader heard it. For decades, the apprentice had envisioned the moment of rebellion as a duel. Blades flashing, wheels clashing, the master falling to his own apprentice's strength. But this was no duel. This was something far more dangerous to the Sith way, a choice born not of ambition, but of love. The holocron records that in that moment, the war between master and apprentice ended not with the ascension of one and the death of the other, but with the shattering of the law itself. Vader rose, not to claim the throne, but to destroy it. Sidious felt the change before it happened. The dark side screamed its warning, but arrogance deafened him. For a fraction of a heartbeat, he believed Vader meant to strike the boy. Then, the armored hands closed around his body. Lightning arced wildly, burning both master and apprentice. The Emperor's scream was not fear, but fury, the rage of a predator betrayed by its own blood. He poured every shred of power into Vader, seeking to burn him from within. Circuits fried, flesh charred, but the grip did not loosen. Step by step, Vader carried Sidious toward the abyss at the heart of the throne room. Here, the rule of two truly broke. The apprentice did not seek to replace the master. He sought to end him entirely. There would be no succession, no new cycle. The dark side's ancient compact between hunger and power was being torn apart by the very hand that had upheld it for decades. The final step came, and with it, the final fall. Sidious was cast into the abyss, his lightning spiraling upward in a blinding storm. The smell of burning armor filled the chamber. The Emperor's scream faded into the depths, leaving only the rasp of a failing respirator and the boys stunned. Silence. Vader stood, barely. His body was failing, his systems wrecked. Every breath was a battle, but he had done what no Sith apprentice before him had done. He had broken the law that bound them. The prophecy the Sith had long denied was fulfilled in that act. The Chosen One shall destroy the Sith, not by claiming the Master's seat, but by ensuring there would be no Master to follow. Luke reached for him, calling him Father, and in that word lay the truth of the moment. This was not the triumph of the apprentice over the Master. This was the triumph of the man over the Sith. The rule of two died in that throne room. Its chains fell with the Emperor. But the holocron warns, death is not always the end, and the dark side does not surrender. Its laws easily. What came after was not peace. It was the last breath before the Sith's shadow reached beyond death itself. Chapter 16. The last breath of the Sith. The throne room was silent. The storm of lightning had faded into darkness, leaving only the stench of scorched metal and the faint hum of the great battle station's machinery. The abyss into which Sidious had fallen swallowed all sound, all light, all trace of the Master who had ruled the galaxy through fear and manipulation for decades. It was over, Dort, or so it seemed. Darth Vader stood at the edge of the abyss, his massive frame trembling. Sparks danced from the rents in his armor, each one a tiny flicker of the war he had just waged. The black shell that had been his prison now felt heavier than ever. Each breath was a ragged tear against lungs and machines too damaged to work together. Luke Skywalker was there, steadying him. The boy's hands, the hands of his son, gripped the armor, not in fear but in resolve. The galaxy might have seen an unmasked monster. Luke saw only the man he had called father, the man who had chosen him over power. Together, they began the long walk from the throne room. Every step echoed against the walls, a rhythm that matched the slowing rasp of Vader's breath. Each step was a step away from the rule of two, from the chains of the Sith, from the life Anakin Skywalker had lost so long ago. Outside, the Death Star shuddered. The rebel fleet was tearing it apart, their attack a storm battering the metal world. But here, in the corridors, time slowed. This was not the war of fleets and blasters. This was the war of life and death. When they reached the hangar, the end was near. Vader, Anakin could feel the light pulling at him, the shadows loosening their grip. His strength was gone, his power bled away in the act of destroying his master. The dark side that had sustained him for so long no longer answered. He was free, and yet freedom came with a price. Luke tried to help him onto the shuttle, but the weight was too much. Vader collapsed to one knee, his breath faltering. He knew there was no time for words, but the truth pressed at him, needing to be spoken before the end. With shaking hands, he reached for his mask. The seal broke with a hiss and the air of the Death Star. Harsh metallic touched his face for the first time in decades. The pale, scarred features beneath were not those of Darth Vader. They were the face of Anakin Skywalker, aged not by years, but by war, pain, and regret. Luke's eyes did not flinch. He did not see the scars, the burns, the ruin. He saw the father he had fought to save. "You were right," Anakin said, his voice now unfiltered, weak but clear. "You were right about me." It was not a Sith's admission. It was the truth of a man who had walked in darkness and finally stepped into the light. For the Sith, there is no death, only the next step in the cycle. Master falls, apprentice rises. But in that moment, the cycle broke. There was no apprentice to take Sidious's place, no master to claim a new heir. The rule of two had been cut in half, left to bleed out alongside its last servant. When Vader's breath stopped, there was no roar of the dark side to claim him, no shadow to linger at the edge of sight. There was only stillness. Luke carried him onto the shuttle. He did not carry a Sith Lord, he carried a father, and when the Death Star died in fire behind them, the galaxy believed that the Sith had died with it. In the halls of the New Republic, they would call it the end of the dark times. In the temples of the Jedi rebuilt from ruin, they would speak of the prophecy fulfilled, the chosen one destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. They were wrong. The holocron remembers differently. It knows that the death of a master and the death of an apprentice are not the same as the death of the Sith. The rule of two is not so easily destroyed. It is more than a code. It is more than a chain. It is the nature of the dark side itself, and somewhere beyond the grave, in the blackest depths of the Force, the shadow of Darth Sidious still moved. Chapter 17. The shadow after death the galaxy celebrated. From the core worlds to the farthest outer rim, fireworks lit the skies. The Emperor was dead, his fleet shattered, his terror ended. The galaxy believed it had witnessed the final death of the Sith. But the holocron speaks of truths the living cannot see. Death is not the end for those who command the dark side. In the abyss beneath the throne room, Darth Sidious's body fell until the storm of his own lightning consumed it. Flesh burned, bone shattered. The vessel that had carried his power for decades was gone. But Sidious himself, the true Sidious, was not flesh. He was will, sharpened into a blade by the dark side. And will does not die so easily, from the depths of that void. His spirit clawed its way into the currents of the Force. He felt the cold of death closing in, felt the pull toward dissolution, toward becoming nothing. The Jedi would have let go. They would have embraced that fading into the great balance. Sidious held on. He was not the first Sith to attempt this. Many had sought immortality. Most had failed, their spirits dissolving into whispers, fading over. Centuries into nothing but curses etched on ancient tombs. But Sidious had prepared for this. Long before the throne room, long before Endor, he had woven himself into artifacts, into hidden sanctuaries, into minds twisted to his service. There were places in the galaxy where the veil between life and death was thin, places where his presence could linger like the scent of smoke after a fire. On worlds steeped in darkness, Exegol, Byz's moribund, the soil itself remembered him. From this ghostly exile, Sidious reached out. At first, his touch was faint, like a cold wind in the halls of old imperial strongholds. But slowly, he grew stronger. His hatred anchored him. His hunger sustained him. And in that hunger, the rule of two whispered once more. The law was broken at Endor, but not destroyed. For the rule is more than a law. It is a hunger. The dark side itself demands be fed. Sidious knew this. If he could not return to flesh, he could at least shape a successor. He could bind another to the chain. Through the Force, his voice began to seep into dreams. Admirals who had served him awoke with his commands burned into their minds. Dark side adepts felt his gaze in the corners of their thoughts. And always, he sought one thing, above all, an apprentice he had learned from Vader's betrayal. This time, he would not choose one who could be swayed by love or redemption. This time, his heir would be bound by fear so deep it could not be broken. The holocron records that in these years after Endor, strange movements stirred in the galaxy's shadows. Fleets vanished into unknown regions. Artifacts of the Sith, thought lost, reappeared in the hands of warlords. Rumors spread of a dark presence in the far reaches, a voice that promised power, whispered secrets, demanded loyalty. The Jedi of the New Republic dismissed these as ghost stories, but the holocron knows better. Ghost stories are the truest kind. Even without a body, Sidious waged war. Not the open war of star destroyers and armies, but the silent war of influence and corruption. He reached into the hearts of the ambitious, feeding their hunger. He planted the seed of the rule in minds that had never heard the words. And always, he waited for one strong enough to serve, yet weak enough to obey. The galaxy thought itself free. In truth, it was only unguarded. Somewhere in the cold between the stars, the shadow of Darth Sidious lingered. His will was a storm with no horizon. His patience was infinite. The master had fallen, the apprentice had died. But the dark side still whispered the old vow. To there shall be. The chain was broken, but Sidious would forge it anew. Chapter 18. The endless hunger the Jedi believed. The rule of two was an invention, a clever device created by Darth Bane to end the chaos of the old Sith Order, to hide them from the Jedi until the time of their return. They thought it was a rule written in blood and ambition, not in the nature of the Force itself. They were wrong. The rule was never merely law. It was instinct. It was the shape the dark side took when given form in mortal hearts. One to embody power, the other to crave it. Master and apprentice, predator and heir. Not because the Sith decreed it so, but because the dark side demands it. It is hunger given purpose. The Jedi speak of balance, of light and dark coexisting, each holding the other in check. But balance is a lie to the dark side. The dark side does not coexist. It consumes, and when it consumes all else, it must consume itself. That is the rule. That is the truth. Bane discovered, not something he created, but something he named. Even when the master dies and the apprentice refuses to claim the title, the hunger does not vanish. It moves, it waits. It finds new vessels, new rivals, new chains to forge. Sidious understood this better than most. His will was not to simply rule the galaxy, but to become the galaxy's hunger itself, an eternal master with no need for an heir. That was his great heresy, and it was why he fell. Vader's rebellion at Endor broke the visible chain, but the invisible one endured. The moment Sidious's spirit refused to dissolve, the cycle began anew. It needed no ceremony, no coronation. The dark side itself began to search for the next pairing. A master to hold power, an apprentice to reach for it. The holocron warns, this is why the Sith can never truly die. You can destroy their armies, burn their temples, scatter their ashes to the void, but as long as the dark side touches sentient minds, the rule will emerge again. It may be called something else. It may wear another mask, but it will be the same. One who holds, one who hungers. Even now, far from the wars of the past, the rule stirs. It does not always begin in darkness. Sometimes it is born in the heart of a Jedi who believes they can master the shadow without succumbing. Sometimes it begins in the halls of politics, in the rivalry between leaders who think themselves allies. The master-apprentice chain can take many forms, but the hunger is always the same. The dark side does not rest, it does not forgive, and it does not stop feeding. This is why the prophecy of the Chosen One, though fulfilled in part, is never complete. Anakin Skywalker destroyed the Sith of his time. He ended Sidious's reign, but he could not destroy the hunger itself. Number one can, not forever. The galaxy will have peace for a time. The chain will lie in shadow, its links unseen. But there will come a day when the whisper returns, a voice in the dark, promising power to the desperate, offering vengeance to the wounded. And when that whisper finds its answer, the rule will rise again. Master, apprentice, hunger, betrayal. This is the cycle that will echo until the last star burns out. And even then, in the silence between galaxies, the dark side will wait, patient, eternal, and empty, seeking always to be filled. The holocron closes with a final truth. The Jedi will never understand this, because they do not wish to. Accept it is to accept that the war between light and dark is not a battle to be won, but a tide to endure. They will fight it again and again, calling each victory the last. But the Sith know better. The dark side is the hunger between the stars, and hunger is endless.